Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Gittin. We are up to Perek Chet Mishnah Dalet. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai, Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov, Chana bad Miriam, Sason ben Raya, and Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen, and Avdi ben Chaim lechaim, v'derifua shelemav, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, betoch shah cholei Israel. Bet Shammai Omrim, Bet Shammai say, Poter Adam Ishto Beget Yashan, a man may divorce his wife with an old get, Ubet Hillel Osrin, but Bet Hillel forbid it, Vezeu Get Yashan, and what is an old get? Kol Shniteched Imah Achar Shekitavo La, any get that he wrote for his wife, and he then spent time alone with her before he gave it to her. According to Bet Hillel, a husband may not divorce his wife with such a get because of the concern that they may have had relations, that he may have had relations with her when they were alone together, and she then conceived and will give birth to a child. Since people assume that a get is given on a date written in it, if she later was to conceive and give birth, they would think that the child was conceived out of wedlock after they were divorced. He might hold the get for a long time, perhaps as long as a year or two before giving it, so the child would be born long after the date written in the get. People would then not want to marry this child when he grows up. While there is no prohibition to marry a child conceived by a man and a woman who were not married, as long as they were permitted to marry each other, it is still considered a defect. Therefore, many people will not want to marry the child. Bet Hillel therefore required that they use a new get with a new date, so that it will be clear that the child was conceived before they were divorced. Bet Shammai, however, are not concerned about this possibility because they assume that he would not have had relations with her. This is because Bet Shammai hold in chapter 9, Mishnah 10, that a man may divorce his wife only if she commits adultery. Since he wrote her a get, she must have committed adultery, and if she did, he would be disgusted with her and not want to have relations with her, even if they are alone together. But Bet Hillel hold that a man may divorce his wife for any reason, therefore he might still have relations with her even after deciding to divorce her. And even Bet Hillel prohibit using such a get only where it is possible to use a different one. However, if the husband already divorced her with an old get and he then left the country, she may remarry based on the old get, as the Rav explains based on Gemara Gittin, page 79b. And that is then of Mishnah Daled. Now, as we have learned previously, a get must have a date on it. The rabbis instituted that the date should be based on the reign of the king of the country in which the get is written. For example, in the 3rd year of King so-and-so. This was instituted to show the government that the Jews respected the king of the country in which they lived. A get must also state the place where it was written and signed. If the get was written and signed in place A, but states that it was written in place B, someone might say the witnesses could have not signed the get in place B because I was with them that day in place A. The get must therefore be a forgery. So to avoid this, the get must correctly state the place where it was written and signed. The Mishnah teaches what happens when the date and place are not written correctly. Katav lishum malchut she'ena hogenet. If someone wrote a get in Babylonia and dated it according to the kings of the uncultured empire, the Roman Empire is called uncultured because its language and alphabet were taken from others. Obviously, if the get was written in the countries ruled by Rome, it would have to be dated accordingly. The Mishnah refers to a get written in other parts of the world. For example, Babylonia, which was under Persian rule at the time the Mishnah was written, as Rashi says on page 79b in Masechet Gittin. Lishum Malchut Madai, Lishum Malchut Yavan, or according to the kings of the Madai Empire, or according to the kings of the Greek Empire. Although these empires no longer existed, he wrote 300 years since the Median or Greek Empire began. Libinyan Abayit, Lechuban Abayit, or according to the year since the building of the temple or since the destruction of the temple. Even though the date is based on the temple, not another empire, it is still not respectful to the ruling empire. Hayaba Mizrach v'katav b'ma'arav, or if the scribe was in a town in the east when he wrote the get and the witnesses signed it there, but he wrote in the get that he was in a town in the west, b'ma'arav v'katav b'mizrach, or he was in the west when he wrote it, but he wrote in the get that he was in the east. In all these cases, the get is invalid, and if she marries someone else based on it, she is subject to the following list of penalties. Since the get is not valid, she is still legally married to the first husband. When she marries a second man, she is therefore committing adultery. She is therefore subject to the same penalties the rabbis imposed on a woman who remarried based on a mistaken testimony that her husband died, as it discusses in Yevamot, chapter 10, Mishnah 1. Now, a get with an invalid date or place is invalid only by rabbinic law. Under biblical law, she is divorced from the first man and is legally married to the second man. Nevertheless, since the rabbis treat her get as invalid, she is subject to all of these penalties. Tetzeh mizeh u'mizeh, she must leave both the first husband and the second husband, like a woman who committed adultery. A woman who commits adultery is forbidden forever to her husband as well as to the man with whom she sinned. Utzicha get mizeh u'mizeh, and she needs to receive a get from both this one and that one before she can marry someone else. She needs a get from the second husband because they are married under biblical law. She needs a get from her first husband because the get he gave her previously was not valid under rabbinic law. Then lah lo ketubah, and she receives payment neither for her ketubah. She does not receive the basic payment of 200 or 100 zuz, nor does she receive any other money promised her in the ketubah. Velo perod, nor for the produce they took from her properties. Normally, a husband may keep the produce of the malok properties his wife owns. It says in Ketubot, chapter 6, Mishnah 1. This is one of the ketubah rights granted to the husband. In this case, since she loses her right to a ketubah from either husband, they lose the right to the produce of her properties. Nevertheless, if they already took the produce, they do not have to repay her for it. This is a penalty to her. Velo mizonot, nor for food. One of the ketubah requirements is for her husband to support his wife. Since she loses her ketubah, she loses this right as well. Velo bilaot, nor for her worn out property. When a woman brings property into a marriage, she can list it either as malok property or tzon barzel property. With tzon barzel property, a husband accepts responsibility to pay the original value of the property if they get divorced, regardless of its actual value at the time. This woman, however, has lost her ketubah and is not paid the original value. She simply takes whatever is left of the properties, even if he ruined them, as the Rav explains in Ramot chapter 10, Mishnah 1, and the Rambam writes in his commentary there. Lo al zeh velo al zeh, not from this one, the first husband, not from that one, the second husband. Im natla mizeh u'mizeh tachzir, and even if she took payment for these things from either of them, she must return it. Aside from the penalty she suffers personally, there are also consequences for her children and for the two men to whom she was married. Vavlad mamzer mizeh u'mizeh, and the child she has after she remarried from either this one or that one is a mamzer, like a child born from adultery. When a married woman has a child from another man, that child is a mamzer. A mamzer may not marry a Jew of proper lineage. The Mishnah teaches that if this woman has a child with the first husband after marrying the second husband, the child is a mamzer. Since her get from the first man was valid biblically, she is therefore really married to the second husband. Therefore, any child she has from her first husband after she remarries is a mamzer. However, since on the rabbinic level her get was not valid, the rabbis decreed that even the child that she has with her second husband is also a mamzer. The Rav tells us that this Mishnah follows the opinion of Meir, who holds if you change from the format of the Chachamim that the Rabbi said in Gittin, the child is a mamzer. The Rav writes that this is not the halacha. V'lo ze v'ze mitamein la, and if she dies and they are kohanim, neither this one nor that one may become tameh to her corpse, because the first husband is really no longer married to her, and the second husband was not permitted to marry her. A kohen is ordinarily forbidden to become tameh by coming in contact with a dead body. The Torah makes an exception in the case of close relatives, including a wife. It says in Vayikra chapter 21, verses 1 through 4. However, this is only for a wife he is permitted to marry. Since her get from the first husband was biblically valid, she was not permitted to marry a kohen, because the kohen may not marry a divorcee. It says in Vayikra chapter 21, verse 7. Since she is improperly married to the second husband, he may not become tameh to her corpse. Neither this one nor that one has the right to the lost objects she finds. The sages gave a husband the right to keep any objects his wife finds when they do not have to be returned to their owners, to prevent argument between the husband and wife. Since both of these men must divorce her, this reason does not apply. Or to the money she earns for work. The sages gave the husband the right to keep his wife's earnings in exchange for having to support her. Since the Mishnah stated that she gets no support from either man, neither of them may keep her earnings. Nor do they have the right to cancel her vows. The Torah gives the husband the right to cancel those vows of his wife that affect their personal relationship and make her unattractive to him, as is in Bamidbar, chapter 30, verse 14 and 17. Since these men are not allowed to remain married to her, there is no concern about her becoming unattractive to them. Some privileges that this woman loses. If she was a daughter of a non-Kohen, she now became disqualified from marrying a Kohen. Since her get from her first husband was biblically valid, she is a divorcee who was forbidden to marry a Kohen. Additionally, since she had relations with the man who was forbidden to her, the second husband, she became a Zonah who was also forbidden to marry a Kohen, as it says in Vayikra chapter 21, verse 6. And this second reason is the basis of the next two laws. Bat Levi mina maaser, if she was a daughter of a Levi, she becomes disqualified from eating maaser. Bat Kohen mina teruma, if she was a daughter of a Kohen, she becomes disqualified from eating teruma. Because she is a zonah, she may not eat teruma, the portion of crop given to a Kohen, or maaser, the portion given to a Levi. Some consequences to the relatives of these two men. Then Yorshav shel Zeh v'Yorshav shel Zeh Yorshin Ktubata. If she dies before these men, neither the heirs of this one nor the heirs of that one inherit the extra money promised to them in her Ktubah. A husband promises in the Ktubah that if his wife dies before he does, then when he dies, her son from him will inherit the value of her Ktubah from his estate and will not have to share that part of the estate with any other sons he has from another wife. This is known as the Ktubah of the male children, as discussed in Ketubot chapter 4, Mishnah 10. The Mishnah teaches that in our case, since she loses her Ktubah while she is still alive, her sons do not inherit its value when their father dies. And if the husbands die without children, both this one's brother and that one's brother must perform chalitza with her, but not yibum. Since this woman was really no longer married to her first husband when he died, there is no mitzvah of yibum with his brother, and she is therefore biblically forbidden to marry him. However, since her get from the first husband was not valid rabbinically, she must at least receive chalitza from his brother before she can marry someone else. The opposite is true in the case of the second husband. Since she was really married to him on the biblical level, when he dies, she must receive either yibum or chalitza from his brother before she can marry someone else. However, since she was rabbinically forbidden to the second husband, his brother does not perform yibum, he must therefore perform chalitza. And the Gemara on page 80b in Masechet Gittin states that our Mishnah follows the view of Rabbi Meir, who imposes all these penalties on a woman who remarries based on a rabbinically invalid get, like we said earlier. However, the halakha follows the view of the sages who say that if she remarried based on such a get, her marriage is recognized after the fact, and these penalties do not apply. The Mishnah now teaches that if certain other details of the get are not written correctly, the same rules apply. Shina shmo shma. If the person writing the get changed the husband's name or the wife's name, meaning he wrote the wrong name for one of them, Shem Miro v'Shem Ira, or if he wrote the name of his city or the name of her city incorrectly, because we know a get must state the cities where the husband and wife live, as Shulchan Aruch discusses this topic in Even Ezel, chapter 128, Halakha 2. But again, our Mishnah writes that a get must state the cities where the husband and wife live. This is required even under biblical law, as the Ritba writes. So if he wrote the name of his city or the name of her city incorrectly, and then her husband gave her this get and she married someone else, it said, she must leave the first husband and the second husband, and all these penalties apply to her. Since she remarried based on the get that was missing information required under biblical law, all these penalties apply to her according to all opinions. And that is an Abu Taib today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen. Amen.